So we're
Hello.
just gonna give it a couple of minutes to let some more people come in, but thank you for joining us. We'll start, in about 4:04. So thank you, and we'll get going soon.
Can I just say I love the art?
Oh yeah, animate that our RA at the Tishman Center. RA, sorry, she is a coordinator now, our project coordinator. Sorry about that, Anna. She does a lot of our artwork and design for us, and always does a great job.
Really beautiful.
I guess it's 4:03. We can get started. So I'd like to welcome everyone to our last Tishman Center Climate Week event, a New York Green Amendment balancing power and equity for environmental justice communities. We're going to have a great slate of speakers for you coming up, and we're going to have some really interesting questions and talk about what a Green Amendment is and how we can have that passed in New York. But first, I wanted to share some housekeeping rules, and then we'll have an introduction after this by Joshua Cohen at Environmental Advocates New York, and then we'll get right into it. So we would like for everyone to mute your device during the presentation. That means your phone or your computer. And we encourage people to use the Zoom chat feature to have discussions and to pose questions, share resources, and connect with others. If anyone has a question, please put it in the chat. We'll be monitoring it for questions to ask our panelists at the end, and we'll have about 10-15 minutes at the end for that. And the session will be recorded and posted on the Tishman Center website, hopefully by tomorrow. So if anyone misses out, you should be able to watch that tomorrow. And with that, I'd like to pass it to Joshua Cohen just to talk a little bit about the partners we worked with on this.
Thank you, Mike. And thank you for joining us today to learn more about the Green Amendment campaign. As Mike said, I'm Joshua Cohen, Director of Campaigns at Environmental Advocates, New York. This event today, entitled A New York Green Amendment, Balancing Power and Equity for Environmental Justice Communities, is being held as part of Climate Week, as Mike mentioned, and it's a collaboration between several organizations, including our host, the Tishman Environment and Design Center at the New School, Green Amendments for the Generations, the Delaware Riverkeeper Network, Adirondack Mountain Club, New York City Environmental Justice Alliance, New York Lawyers for the Public Interest, and Environmental Advocates, New York. So you'll be hearing from some of these organizations in the session, specifically on the environmental justice implications of the Green Amendment, and there will be an opportunity to ask questions later on. We'd initially intended to hold this event this past April in person at the New School, but COVID surprised us all, and we've shifted our campaign virtually at the moment. Some of you may have joined us for the 3-part webinar series we held in May, and some of you may be joining and learning about the Green Amendment for the first time today. I know there's a lot happening in the world, and it's overwhelming, but all the more reason to look to tools like the Green Amendment to ease the environmental burden on frontline communities and elevate justice and equity in our fight for clean air, clean water, and a healthful environment. So I'll pass it back to you, Mike, who will be moderating the conversation with our panelists. Thanks again for joining us.
All right. Thanks a lot, Joshua. So I'll introduce myself, then I'll have our panelists go next. So my name is Mike Harrington. I work at the Tishman Environment and Design Center at the New School, where I am an assistant director. I do a lot of things like put programming like this together, work on policy, work on design, basically looking at everything through an environmental justice lens. And I'm actually really interested to hear how this panel goes because I recently finished Maya's book about the Green Amendment. So I'm really, really curious to see how we can push this forward in New York and what the implications would be for the environmental justice communities that we work with. So now I would like to pass it on to Christine just to introduce herself And then after that, we'll have Eddie do an introduction, Kate, and then Maya will do an introduction and go into what a Green Amendment is. So thank you, and Christine, happy to introduce you.
Thanks, Mike, and thank you for inviting me to be on this panel. My name is Christine Appah, and I'm a senior staff attorney in the Environmental Justice Program at New York Lawyers for the Public Interest. My work focuses on environmental health and sustainability, and there I work in partnership with community members, individuals, to work on issues related to environmental policy. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about this very important Green Amendment today, and I'm looking forward to hearing and learning from everyone on the panel.
Did you jump in or?
Yes, yeah, Eddie.
Sorry, I remain Zoom challenged all. Thanks for inviting me. My name is Eddie Bautista. I'm the Executive Director of the New York City Environmental Justice Alliance, citywide coalition of community-based organizations from the city's most environmentally overburdened communities. We founded in 1991, and we are active in multiple coalitions, including several with our good friends at Environmental Advocates and New York Lawyers, and happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Eddie. And Kate, could you give us a short intro?
Yeah, great. Hi, everyone. My name is Kate Kurera. I'm the Deputy Director at Environmental Advocates New York. We're based in Albany and really just pushing the state to be a green leader in environmental policies, with water, climate, healthy communities, and really been excited to be part of this Green Amendment campaign and looking forward to the talk. Thank you.
Thanks. And last but not least, Maya, could you give us an introduction and then also let us know what the Green Amendment is?
Great. So why don't I start my screen share so that that doesn't confuse me while I go from my introduction into the talk. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here, and I want to thank you so much for including me in this wonderful program. I think I agree. I think it's a wonderful finish to your speaker series. I'm really so thrilled to be joined by such an auspicious group of experts, and we really, now to see our New York Green Amendments for the Generations Coalition growing with the New School and with New York Lawyers for the Public Interest and the New York City Environmental Justice Alliance, joining with Environmental Advocates of New York, the Adirondack Mountain Club, Delaware Riverkeeper Network, and Green Amendments for the Generations in advancing this idea. So it's really exciting. Thank you so much. Just about me, I think really quickly, what I like people to know about me is that for the last 26 years, I have had the honor of serving as the Delaware Riverkeeper and leader of the Delaware Riverkeeper Network, which is a 4-state organization that works throughout New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Delaware, and when necessary at the national level to fight the good fight for our environment and for our communities. It is as a result of that work that I have actually founded this new national movement called Green Amendments for the Generations. Because of that work that I wrote the book, The Green Amendment, and have the great honor of working with all of you. The reason why it's important for you just to know those few things about me is because I've been doing environmental advocacy and litigation for over 26 years now. And it is as a result of that work, being an environmental advocate, that I have come to realize and recognize that our current system of environmental protection laws is truly and fundamentally failing us, and that we really need a new path of protection in the state of New York and states across our nation and here in the United States of America. And when people hear me say, well, we need a new path for environmental protection, they ask, Maya, how can that possibly be? If you look at every state across our nation and you look at the federal level, we literally have hundreds of thousands of environmental protection laws in place. We've got all these agencies and policies and programs, all of these initiatives that are supposed to be focused on environmental protection. So why do we need something more? Well, we need something more because this current system of government and laws that we have really is designed to accept pollution and degradation of our environment devastation of our communities as a foregone conclusion, something to be accepted and thought about at the end of the decision-making process, when really all that's left to be focused on is how are we going to permit, how are we going to manage the who, the when, the where we allow the pollution and degradation to take place. This current system of government and laws is not focused on preventing pollution and preventing degradation in the first instance. And of course, under this system of laws, there are many gaps. There are a lot of things that are not covered. All too often, there is poor implementation of even the laws that we do have on the books. And inevitably, at some point or another, somebody will get into political office, into a position of power that does not recognize or appreciate the power and importance of environmental protection, and will quickly work to roll back even the laws that we do have on the books. And fundamentally, the way this system of laws and government is written, the way they're implemented, is environmental racism is built in, with communities of color and indigenous communities, immigrant and low-income communities, continuously and consistently unfairly targeted for highly polluting industrial operations and environmentally degrading activities. And so as a result of all of this, what we can see is communities across the state of New York, across our nation, are suffering from pollution and degradation, are drinking contaminated water, breathing polluted air, right? Are suffering from contaminated soils. And of course, we're suffering a climate crisis, right? So we have all of these problems because of this system of government we have. And so we can tell that there is fundamentally something missing. The system is flawed. And so the question is, what is that something missing? And there are probably a lot of something missings, but fundamentally, one of the big something missings was recognized by Senator Franklin Curry in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, actually many years ago. Senator Curry realized that one of the reasons why our environment was allowed to become so degraded, so damaged, that it was harming every aspect of the lives of the people of Pennsylvania, was because we were not recognizing and protecting the rights to clean water and clean air, a stable climate, and healthy environments in the same way we were recognizing and protecting all of the other fundamental freedoms that we hold dear. Things like the right to free speech and freedom of religion, the right to peaceably assemble, private property rights, due process rights, and more. We were not recognizing and protecting environmental rights in the Bill of Rights section of our state and federal constitutions. After this recognition, Senator Curry embarked on an effort to change that. And as a result of his work, actually in the Bill of Rights section of the Pennsylvania Constitution, there is an amendment that recognizes the inalienable rights of all people to clean air and pure water and a healthy environment, and recognizes the duty of government officials in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania to protect these rights for all the people and protect the natural resources of the state for all the people, including specifically future generations. The first time this amendment got its first most powerful use was actually in 2012, spanning into 2013, when my organization, the Delaware Riverkeeper Network, and I, in my role as the Delaware Riverkeeper, used it to challenge a very pro-fracking law that was passed by the Pennsylvania legislature. A law that was literally a gift basket to the fracking industry, an industry that already had a powerful and devastating foothold in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. But because of this law, right, fracking was going to devastate even more communities in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. This law did things like give the industry the power of eminent domain in certain contexts. It gave them automatic waivers from environmental protection standards, relieved them of the obligation to notify people on private drinking water wells if the industry had potentially contaminated their drinking water, and much, much more. And long story short, while things were already bad for the people of Pennsylvania because of fracking, if Act 13, this pro-fracking law, had been allowed to stand, things were about to get a whole lot worse. Well, at the Delaware Riverkeeper Network, we have been fighting fracking for a very long time. And that's another story. But we knew, right, while we had protected our watershed from fracking, we knew that fracking anywhere would be devastating for all of us everywhere. And because we had the legal program in place, I decided that we needed to challenge Act 13. There were also 7 towns that wanted to challenge the law, and we teamed up. But the Delaware Riverkeeper Network, the only environmental organization in this joint venture, brought to this this partnership, this challenge of Act 13, a claim that Act 13, if implemented, would violate the Environmental Rights Amendment in the Bill of Rights section of the Pennsylvania Constitution. And long story short, the case went all the way up to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, and in December of 2013, we got an amazing victory written by the very conservative Chief Justice of that conservative Supreme Court. I want you to read with me just a few things that Chief Justice Castile wrote in this December 2013 opinion. He wrote that by any responsible account, the exploitation of the Marcellus Shale Formation, the drilling and fracking that would be allowed to expand and take place, will produce a detrimental effect on the environment, on the people, their children, and future generations. And that as a result, the provisions of Act 13 that we were challenging were in fact unconstitutional because they would violate the environmental rights of the people of Pennsylvania. And in that moment, with that victory, we defeated some of the most devastating aspects of Act 13. And we literally breathed legal life into this Environmental Rights Amendment, which up until this point had been largely ignored. Now, as we, in the wake of that amazing victory, as I was thinking about the power and importance of what we had accomplished for the people of Pennsylvania legally and emotionally, and in terms of their environmental rights, I realized that there was more in this victory than just for the people of Pennsylvania, that there was a message for all people in all communities across our nation. The message that our rights to pure water and clean air, a stable climate, and healthy environments are inherent and indefeasible rights that belong to us by virtue of the fact that we are people here on this earth, and that these are rights that are worthy of constitutional recognition and protection. And I embarked on an initiative to look at every state constitution across our nation to see what was the status of these environmental rights amendments across our nation. And what I found was that there were only 2 states that had an amendment of this kind, an amendment that I now define as a green amendment if they meet certain elements. Those 2 states were Pennsylvania and Montana. Beyond that, we had a lot of states that talked about the environment in their constitutions, but they didn't rise to the level of being a green amendment. They didn't include all of the key fundamental elements that are essential. They weren't in the Bill of Rights section of the Constitution. They did not recognize the rights of all people, regardless of their race, their ethnicity, their income level. They didn't protect future generations. They weren't self-executing, meaning they had legal life as soon as they were added to the Constitution. There was not a mandate that every government official at every level of government protect the environmental rights of all the people enumerated in the Constitution. And so that's when I embarked on this Green Amendments for the Generations initiative to try to inspire the passage of green amendments in every state across our nation. And we have been met with amazing success and energy and interest. And very notably, the energy and interest in the state of New York is right at the forefront of this advancing initiative with a powerful New York Green Amendment proposal that you're going to hear more about as we have today's conversation. But I want you to know that there is a proposal in New York for people to get behind, as well as some other states if you happen to be listening from somewhere else. Broad brush, what does it mean to have a Green Amendment? Just want to go through in some really broad strokes. It means that environmental rights are protected as powerfully as we protect those other fundamental rights we hold dear, like the rights to free speech and freedom of religion. It means that every government official at every level of government is duty bound to protect the environmental rights of all the people. It means that there must be a focus on prevention of harm first in order to protect the constitutional right to a healthy environment. It means that environmental justice is incredibly empowered, and we are really on a path to ending environmental racism because every single individual has the same right to a healthy environment, and government officials are duty bound to protect all the people equitably. right? Government must consider the facts and the science and the impacts as they engage in their decision making, particularly when we're talking about environmental justice communities. And they must do that before they take their actions or make their decisions. Long story short, no more environmental sacrifice zones. Environmental advocates are empowered because we're no longer tree huggers and fish lovers. We are people who are rising up to challenge the constitutional rights of all people in our communities. The goal of a Green Amendment is to get good decisions in the first place, but when our government officials get it wrong, Green Amendments give us immediate access to the courts to vindicate our constitutional right to a healthy environment. So with that, I hope you all agree with me that we all have a right to a Green Amendment. And I did want you to know, if you did end up getting a copy of the book, we're giving a discount to anybody who listened to today's show. But more importantly, every penny goes back to the Green Amendment movement. But you don't need to read the book to get the information. www.nygreenamendment.org. There's a lot there for you to learn about and get engaged.
Oh, thanks a lot for that, Maya. And yeah, I just recently finished the book. It was super informative. So hopefully we can get the gist of what a Green Amendment would actually look like in New York and how that would actually apply to things. So I'd like to start our panel off by asking, we have a lot of lawyers on the panel, I've noticed. Christine, I'd actually want to know what you think about some examples of the ways the Green Amendment could be used as a tool to protect environmental justice communities in New York from environmental hazards and pollution.
Thank you, Maya, for that great introduction, and thank you, Mike, for the question. Environmental justice communities are often met with a very serious challenge. They have to not only identify the wrong that they're experiencing, but oftentimes they are met with the challenge of trying to establish the right while crafting the remedy. This places them in a very precarious position when it comes to the legal system. We can advocate through different channels, whether they be legislative or community organizing, but the courts have consistently posed a challenge to environmental justice practitioners and communities in pursuit of the goal of environmental justice. Challenges include things like standing, whether or not you actually have the right to sue. And then other challenges include what kind of remedy is a court allowed or permitted to give to you in this instance. The Green Amendment offers a new paradigm, and it's a very attractive option for people who are suffering from environmental justice ills by creating a new paradigm that require proactive protection as opposed to a retroactive assessment of an environmental wrong. So what that would mean would that be that the burden would really be on the government to ensure the application of these principles of environmental justice, that communities shouldn't be overburdened, that we should redistribute or at least attempt to distribute in an equitable way the environmental harms that we all must experience in some way because of the demands of our society. But we can't have them all in one neighborhood, and then we can't have them all faced by people who look a certain way. So with the Green Amendment, it would establish a fundamental right within the Constitution. And that means that people would finally be able to use this right in tandem with some of the already established rights. You can use it, for instance, with the State Environmental Quality Review Act, which would require the government to make an assessment about the quality of an action that could impact the environment. So having this Green Amendment would help environmental justice groups to affirmatively say that this is a right that must be protected. The state has a constitutional obligation to protect this right for me on my behalf. And this would be something unlike any other remedy available in law or in any other context. So I think as an environmental justice practitioner, I see this as a very hopeful option, and hopefully this paradigm will catch on. Other states will also, partake in this option. So that's some ways that it could help communities.
Thanks a lot, Christine. And next I wanted to go to Eddie to follow up on that, since we all know you work with a lot of communities. How do you think a Green Amendment can protect, or do you think Green Amendments can protect EJ communities from existing hazards, or what do you think about what Christine shared and what Maya just shared as well?
Absolutely, and I also want to thank New School and EA for inviting us. If I'm allowed to embrace my inner cynical New Yorker, I got to be totally candid with y'all. When I first heard about this, I thought to myself, Green Amendment, okay, is this kind of like the environmental version of All Lives Matter? Like, are we, when I hear all and everyone, like immediately the cynic in me starts asking some of these questions. Also started wondering, okay, it's an amendment. You know, we should ask our African-American brothers and sisters how well amendments in the Federal Bill of Rights have worked out for them, specifically the 14th and 24th Amendments. And as I let my cynicism wash away from me, I started looking at what we do have, right? And both Christine and Maya, I think have done an expert job in deconstructing just how precarious environmental protections really are for us, both for EJ communities and frankly for all New Yorkers, right? You know, let's just look at you know the stuff that's more popularly known, the State Environmental Quality Review Act, or SECRA. You know, there are mandates under SECRA that developers and government need to look at, say, cumulative impacts. Oh, and by the way, a quick shout out to our brothers and sisters in New Jersey, Ironbound and New Jersey Environmental Justice Alliance, that just got passed an environmental justice law that is the envy of environmental justice activists across the country. Like, to be able to actually deny a permit because you've got too much poison in your community. Again, what passes for progress in this country makes me insane, but I will take it. What Jersey did is leading the way for all of us. But, you know, for example, we have SECRA that supposedly is supposed to protect us from, or at least mandates a cumulative impact analysis, right? You know, there's supposed to be mitigation if you find that there is some sort of environmental harm. You know, just look at just those two provisions, and you know, it's a mockery, right? Whatever cumulative impact analyses that are done are never comprehensive. When we look at mitigation, I remember one lawsuit that we were involved in where the mitigation for an enormous power plant involved changing the traffic lights at a specific corner. Still to this day, don't know how that mitigated anything. Then we look at litigation success, right? Assuming we all had access to counsel and were able to sue. I remember a Michael Gerard analysis years ago where I think it was something like in environmental litigation, when in 70% of cases when there has been an environmental assessment but no full environmental impact statement, in 70% of those cases, litigants, people from the public suing, lose those cases. When there's an environmental impact statement, the loss rate is over 90%, right? So it's just an epic failure in terms of environmental quality review, and that being a toolbox. Then I started asking, okay, well, if it's a state green amendment, what does that mean in terms of local action, right? Because the bulk of EJ problems that I have seen over the years is driven by local zoning, right? Like, the zoning laws is what's created. If you zone out these uses, so there's only a handful of communities that don't have the political or legal tools to rezone their communities, this is how a classic way environmental justice or injustices play out for us. And so all of a sudden, when I started hearing that, no, a green amendment could have local applicability and potentially local impact, I started thinking, yeah, okay, this is something that, look, folks, we need as many tools as possible in these fights, right? And the fact that, I'm still having trouble getting past the fact that we don't have a legal right to a clean environment, putting that aside. That as a toolbox, or adding that tool to our toolbox, is something that from an environmental justice perspective is powerful. And even in the context of New York State's Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, there are implications there as well. So let me stop there.
And I may follow up with you later about that, Eddie. But to go from the community to more of a statewide view, Kate, I wanted to know if this is something that the state goes forward with, what is the strategy for getting a Green Amendment passed in the state of New York? And like from now until adoption, what does that take?
Yeah, great. Thanks, everyone. Yeah, that's right. So just to give you the landscape of what's happening in New York at the moment, as Maya alluded to, we do have a proposal in New York State for a Green Amendment, and the amendment would be to the Bill of Rights section of the Constitution, and it's a very simple statement, but would read, each person shall have the right to clean air, water, and a healthful environment. As we mentioned, because it is an amendment to the state constitution, there's a procedural process for that to occur. So what has currently happened is a bill with those words, that amendment language to the Constitution, passed the state legislature in 2019. And for an amendment to the Constitution to occur, two consecutively elected legislatures need to pass the same language or the same bill. So where we are at the moment is what we call second passage. So the next legislature that will be, which will convene in 2021 in January, will be a new elected body because of the election, upcoming election. And it is at that point that legislative body needs to pass the same exact language. So this is a lot of what we're talking about now, and getting the support and momentum behind for second passage, which to be fair, there's a lot more at stake, because once it passes the legislature in 2021, it can move directly to a statewide referendum. So it'll be on a state ballot in November 2021. It's not, the governor has no power to veto this amendment. It goes directly to the people of New York.
And just to follow up on that, are there any have you run into any opposition to the Green Amendment? And if so, like how have they responded to you all, to what you're doing?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, this concept has actually been around in New York for many, many years. And the assembly of the New York State Legislature had drafted this language and gone through the process of passing it many, many years, but never had received passage in the Senate, mainly because of the political makeup of the New York State Senate was Republican for, I believe 10 years. The switch occurred in 2019. And we really didn't see a tremendous amount of opposition at that point in time. Again, that's the first passage, so the stakes are really higher the second time around. We have heard opposition. The general opponents appear to generally come from the business community. I think they view this as like another restriction, another hoop that they'll have to jump through to meet. They make the arguments like there are so many environmental laws on the books. Why should we be regulated by something else? And that's a little bit of misunderstanding. If you listen to Maya and the way we talk about it, it's not actually wouldn't affect them in that way. So there is a bit of misunderstanding. We've heard pushback from legislators and other people in the legal community that it's too broad. What does clean air? What does clean water mean? We could never achieve those things. And our response to that is that most of the if not all of the language in the Bill of Rights sections of the New York Constitution, or the federal Constitution for that matter, are vague, right? It's the job of the courts that will help through case law define what these terms mean and the boundaries and limits of what they mean for the people of New York. So we don't find that to be a very compelling argument. And I just want to actually add too, because I think this is a compelling part of why, not only to get over the fact that we don't have this right, which should seem inherent in what we deserve, but also that, in particular, the New York State Constitution, you have 18 other rights enumerated, one of which is your right as New York residents or New York citizens to play bingo. And you can look it up. The words bingo are articulated and spelled out in the New York State Constitution. So I would argue that if we have the right to play bingo, we sure as hell should have a right to drink clean water and breathe clean air. And I think that is also a very powerful way to talk about this right, especially when you're talking to those who oppose it.
Oh, thanks for sharing that. And Yeah, I just wanted to go back to Maya for a little bit because I know, and Kate, thanks for mentioning that how the courts do often have to interpret things. And I know Maya talks about judicial review in her book and how that's very important to basically enforce a lot of these amendments and rules that we have. So Maya, I wanted to know how, since we're talking in the EJ context, how can that judicial review and a green amendment protect marginalized people, especially communities of color and low-income communities in New York and other states?
Thank you for that. Yeah, so I mean, I do want to recognize, and a point that Eddie made, which is having a constitutional right to something doesn't automatically mean that our government gets it right in the first go around, right? 13th, 14th, 15th Amendments, we can look at that history. We can also look at Pennsylvania's Green Amendment. Pennsylvania's Green Amendment was actually added to the Pennsylvania Constitution in 1971. It took 42 years until my organization brought the legal challenge that overturned 42 years of bad precedent, right? So it doesn't mean that we will get it instantly right, or the government and the courts will instantly get it right. But having that language in the Constitution, properly framed, properly placed, properly written, right, means that when our government officials get it wrong, the opportunity is always there for us to make it right. That's number one. Number two, I also would suggest to you that with our modern our modern day Green Amendment movement, we're working really hard to make sure that states get the placement and get the language right, put in place the legislative history, right, where in how the legislators talk about the Green Amendment as they're working to pass it, that they offer absolute clarity on what they mean by it. That absolute clarity in the record books will help make sure that when a case is brought forth, there is less chance, less opportunity for a misapplication, misappropriation of the law in the first instance. Now, it is true, right? So in the first instance, the addition of a Green Amendment places the responsibility on government officials to get it right. And it is true, when they mess up and they get it wrong, that people will have to get access to an attorney to try to make the record right. They'll have to get access to legal resources. And that is a hurdle, and that is a challenge in the Green Amendment context, as in every other context where we need to use the law to vindicate our rights when they've got it wrong. So I do want to acknowledge and recognize that hurdle, but I do also want to stress what Christina and Eddie said, is that the Green Amendment, the language will help give us the access to the courts we need to vindicate those rights when there's been a problem. In other states, and I can stop, Mike, I just really briefly, in Pennsylvania and Montana, the Green Amendment has been used to challenge bad laws and get them declared unconstitutional, to challenge permits and get them voided and rescinded. Right now, we're using the Green Amendment in a community that has suffered from decades of a contaminated site. And we're using the Green Amendment to claim that the government's failure to clean up that site is a violation of their constitutional rights. We're using the Green Amendment to force drinking water standards for communities that are drinking contaminated water, where again, government has failed to act. So broad brush, I think I tried to put it in those strokes so people can think about what are the challenges they face in their communities and how might a Green Amendment apply to those challenges. And also always happy to answer specific questions, but hopefully those broad strokes help.
All right, thanks a lot. And that actually, what you mentioned, I'd actually like to know Christine, where Maya just said that having access to attorneys is a big hurdle, and you work for the New York Lawyers for the Public Interest. So I'd like to know what you think of that and how you think your organization would be able to interact with that, or if you think that's something that that your group could actually help with.
I think it's fascinating. I think that as a public interest organization, our goal is to use as many tools as available to ensure access to the courts, to ensure social justice for the populations that we serve. Oftentimes we're met with challenges, legal challenges or policy challenges, and we try to come with creative solutions for them. This can be, this amendment could be used for some of the groups that we're helping in different ways. We offer free legal services, and we understand that it's not an option for many people to retain an attorney, particularly in environmental justice communities. So this would really create an avenue that we could use to inform the public of their rights and educate them, and use not only litigation, but other complementary tools that have become part of our work at New York Lawyers for the Public Interest, including community organizing and community education. Once people understand that they do have a right to clean water, clean air, and a healthful environment, the conversation shifts. And part of the work of a public interest attorney is to inform the public and make sure that they have the tools and the vocabulary that they need to pursue the rights that have been established either through courts, but this time through some of the highest allocation of rights, which would be in the state constitution. So I envision that this could be a very powerful tool that we could use in many different contexts, and also to encourage the public to become part of the conversation, because once people are cognizant of the rights that they have, they're better able to enforce them, even if it means by assisting them with pro bono legal services or encouraging them to pursue the cases by themselves. They'll be better informed, and also there'll be more hope at the end of the case that they'll actually get the redress that they're seeking.
Thanks, and thanks for that. And I'm just gonna circle back to Eddie quickly about, I really appreciate that you mentioned organizing. I was a community organizer myself, and Eddie's been doing that for a while. So I know you mentioned the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act. Do you think that's something that the Green Amendment complements that? And also in terms of organizing, since I know you've been at it for a while, like what do you think, how do you think that could complement passing a Green Amendment as well?
Gotcha. So the first question, let me give an example, right? So the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act that passed last year, by all accounts, the strongest climate action plan and mandate by all the states, specifically looks at greenhouse gas emissions, right? We inserted provisions to make co-pollutant reduction, or at least no increases in co-pollutants, particularly in the context of offset programs that a net zero law like CLCPA inevitably, unfortunately, invites. But the issue of co-pollutants is an example, right? So those of you, some of you may or may not know this, right? But it's not the greenhouse gases, it's not carbon, it's not the greenhouse gases that are choking and having the disproportionate negative health impacts in our communities. That is due to co-pollutant exposure, right? Nitrogen oxide, sulfur oxide, PM 2.5, et cetera. That is, unfortunately, we didn't get a emissions reduction mandate for co-pollutants, but we did get some measure of that, at least no increases in the CLCPA. That's an example of where a Green Amendment could breach a gap that the CLCPA just couldn't reach, right? To the degree that co-pollutants continue to be the exposure that's had the most deleterious impacts on our public health, the fact that a Green Amendment could help us attack in a more fundamental way, right? The disproportionate exposures of our communities to co-pollutants, again, is something that I see us using in concert with CLCPA as we look at reducing the disproportionate vulnerabilities our communities have, not just obviously to climate change, but to just, a variety of public health and environmental indicia. In terms of organizing, I'm sorry, Mike, what was the organizing question?
Oh, sorry.
I flinch when I hear organizing these days because it just means more emails for me. But
yeah.
Go ahead, brother. What were you going to say?
No, I was just saying that Christine mentioned that organizing is just another tool, just like I think this amendment would be. But do you think these tools are, how do you feel they could be complementary in New York City or New York State to each other?
Absolutely. And Christine touched on it. I cannot overstate how important political education is, especially in this moment. Any good organizer will tell you that your ability to be able to mobilize an informed and inflamed base of people to get stuff done, at bottom, is driven by your ability to be able to communicate both the stakes that your community is facing and what tools you have to fight back, right? A Green Amendment component of our political education in all of the environmental campaigns that we're involved with now is the kind of, again, tool that gives organizers and local activists not just hope, but a real, tool to use in whatever environmental or development or fight that you're in. So I see it as a really basic organizing tool. I'd be interested to hear from Maya how some folks in Pennsylvania, Montana, what have you seen how organizing has kind of taken the Green Amendment and used it not just in courts but in their organizing efforts.
So it's really because there is a lot of litigation and it is powerful there, but people are absolutely 100% using it in their advocacy. I can't tell you how many communities I go into and there's some sort of challenge going on at the local level, at the state level. And, they're struggling to raise their arguments. And then I get up and I talk about the duty of those government officials under the Constitution to protect the environmental rights of the people and quote the Constitution. And suddenly you can see people are sitting up straighter, right? And they come to me afterwards and they say, I didn't realize that we had this constitutional right. That's really one of the problems in Pennsylvania is that our victory is still so fresh and so new that we are working hard in Pennsylvania and in Montana to let people know they have this right. But also when I go into, advocacy, again, hearing rooms, meetings, you will hear people who are already aware of the Green Amendment, how empowering for them it is intellectually, emotionally, really, when they walk up to speak with their government officials in public meetings and in private meetings, this idea that they have to convince them to do the right thing or make the right decision is transformed into this stance of you have an obligation and a duty to protect my constitutional right. And I think if people think about constitutional rights sort of advocacy and activism in other contexts when it comes to speech or religious freedoms or gun rights, right? Private property rights. I mean, think about how empowered those advocates are when they go up and when the government officials render the decision that they think is wrong. Those advocates and for those other fundamental rights don't sit down and shut up, right? They get enraged. Because their constitutional right has been violated. And so they don't sit down and sort of accept the decision and say, well, we lost under the law. They recognize and realize that there is this more powerful something. It's the Constitution, but remember, it's not just the Constitution. It is the Constitution recognizing and empowering legally their human right to clean water and clean air, a stable climate and healthy environment. So it really does, it's very empowering on the advocacy level for the advocates, but also for the decision makers on the dais who are having this Constitution quoted at them time and time again.
Oh, thanks. And I'm gonna take a couple of questions from our audience. And since we do have the luxury of having some lawyers here, I'd like to ask this question about language. So someone asks, why explicitly mention water and air if those things are inherently included in a healthful environment? So if anyone wants to take that question, feel free to.
Maya?
Okay.
If you want to go first, but I certainly have thoughts. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay. So first up, one of the things is that it is important, right? We want language that is broad, but also that has enough specificity that there's some clarity over what we really mean. And clean water and clean air are fundamentally important to all people, to their health, and sort of represent an area of our ecology and our environment. When you think about the water and the air, there are many, many elements to that. You're right. Fundamentally, they should be included in a healthful environment, which, by the way, as a result of our collective advocacy, the legislators have made very clear that they are talking about human health as well as ecological health. But you are right, it is subsumed in that and could be. But the more clarity we can offer using sort of that general language principles that normally go along with the Constitution helps ensure that when we are in the courtroom, there's less chance that the judges and the justices, right, do that bad decision that sets that bad precedent. I do also want you to know, if you look at the 5 states where we have a Green Amendment proposal now, New York, New Jersey, Maryland, West Virginia, and Vermont, the 2 states where we have a Green Amendment, Pennsylvania and Montana, and the other states where we're anticipating Green Amendment proposals, New Mexico, Maine, and now also Oregon, and a couple of other states. Every single one of them, the language is a bit different. And I go in with model language based on our experience in Pennsylvania and my work around the nation on this, and sort of bring in that model language, but make very, very clear the language has to suit the personality of that state. So every state has something that's a little bit different in order to suit their personality, and mention sort of different aspects and qualities of the environment in their language. This language, clean water and air and a healthful environment, with that, the legislators offering that clarity about healthful, meaning again, human health as well as environmental health, is what worked for the legislators, the leaders, and the personality of New York State, and gets us what we need in terms of constitutional environmental rights protection.
And Kate, actually, could you follow up a little bit and talk about specifically what a New York State that could look like, and which legislators are champions of this, or who are you working with to bring this to fruition here?
Yeah, so certainly there were obviously 2 sponsors. Assembly member Engelbright was the sponsor in the Assembly, who's also the chair of the Environmental Conservation Committee, and Senator Carlucci was the Senate sponsor. So these were is who we worked with predominantly in 2019 to help the bill get through the legislature. And we'll work with the environmental leaders, as well as a lot of it too was the Senate Majority Leader Andrea Stewart-Cousins. The leadership of both the House and the Senate are extremely important in bringing these bills up to vote. So, significant call out to both Speaker Hastie and Majority Leader, and we'll be working with them both, as well as the sponsors of the next bill. So it'll be a new bill number because it will be reintroduced. Well, not reintroduced, a bill will be introduced, which will have the same language in the next legislative session.
Thanks a lot. Let's see if we have time for one more question, and then I'd just like to hear some final thoughts. Let's see if there's something else. I guess either Christine or Eddie could answer this one, but and I don't know if you could answer this, but if a Green Amendment is passed, how do you think that would impact the environmental impact statements that are required in New York City? So I'll be specific, in New York City. Do you all have any thoughts about that, or how that could, how that may work?
Sorry, I just realized I was. Do you want to start, Christine?
Sure. The obligation that the Green Amendment would put on government actors would be to assess, to ensure that the action that they're about to take comports with the Green Amendment, to make sure that people have the right to clean air, clean water, and a healthful environment. So it would be a prospective. They'd be looking at it before they even start putting the plan into place, before assessing the environmental impact, it would be from the perspective of more conserving human health, as opposed to, if we do this and human health is impacted, how can we mitigate it? So it really shifts the focus in a way that hasn't been applied before. So I think that in New York City, it would be very interesting, particularly if we're seeing environmental impact statements as one of the key things that people are using to challenge government action that they believe may have a impact on their health. So I think it would be definitely be a paradigm shift.
Yeah, Christine said it best. I still can't get past the idea of tailoring the Green Amendment to each state's personality. First of all, I don't need the New York State personality. It may be toxic enough that the Green Amendment would be helpful for a personality change for New York State, right? So it'd be interesting to hear how it played out differently in Montana and Pennsylvania. But yeah, I do shudder to think of a Green Amendment with a New York personality. But yeah.
Mike, can I just offer one addition to your question?
Oh yeah, of course.
So one of the things I just want to offer to people is, remember, right, the Constitution is above all the laws. So it's one thing when you go into New York City or anywhere in New York State and people say, well, we've conducted the environmental impact statement, the environmental assessment, we've gone through the process and the review we're supposed to go through. We've checked the boxes of the law that says we have to look at this and we can give a permit to allow XYZ amounts of toxic pollution into the air and into the water. And, you know, without the Green Amendment, if you fulfill that process and that thoughtfulness, and then you can say that you've checked the boxes under the regulations and the legislation, you can still go forth and do that crappy bad thing, you know, harming environmental justice communities and foisting insult upon insult upon insult. But when you have a Green Amendment, your government officials, whether it's the city, the town council, the legislators, or the governor, they have to also be able to show independently that they have complied with the constitutional obligation to protect the rights of the people to clean water and air and a healthful environment. So it adds not just a layer of additional process in that they have to engage in transparent and thoughtful decision-making to be able to withstand a constitutional challenge. But more importantly, it puts in place a substantive obligation that complements the law, but is also freestanding. So it will not be good enough, right, for the city to be able to say, we did all of the proper assessments and we checked all the boxes. They're going to have to independently be able to show that they complied with this individual or this separate substantive constitutional obligation to protect the environmental rights of the people that are going to be impacted. So it's really adds an incredibly additional layer of power in the hands of the right advocates and the right lawyers fighting with it and for it.
Oh, thanks a lot. And since we started a little late, I'll just give it, you know, we'll just go until about 5-6 minutes after, but I just wanted to hear final thoughts from anyone if you did have any final thoughts. Yeah, again, we can start with you, Christine, if you have any final thoughts that you want to share with us.
Well, I just want to say again, I appreciate the opportunity to join in this discussion. I think it's a very important discussion, and the possibility of a Green Amendment is something that I think would really be a tool of empowerment and seeing a substantive right to a healthful environment, as many people on this panel and many people who have joined us today have been working for. Of course, it's going to be an uphill battle, and there are people in opposition to it, but considering what is at stake and the principles of intergenerational equity that we must work to preserve, it's not just our environment, but we have to look at it as what our great-great-great-grandchildren are the people of the future will look back and say, at least they tried. So I think that's my closing thought. And, you know, as an environmental justice attorney, the struggle continues, but, you know, there are pockets of light to work towards. So, and hopefully this will be something for the people of New York in the future.
Well, thank you a lot for attending, and thanks for all the work you're doing. Eddie, any final thoughts that you have?
Look, I started by saying that I'm a cynical New Yorker. I'm a cynical optimist, right? Which means that I'm generally positive about the future, so long as somebody can get something out of it. So I'm a cynical optimist, right? But one of the things that I've been taken aback by in the last year was just how much and how quickly the CLCPA has had an impact in New York State government operations, right? Like, we saw over the summer, the Williams pipeline. One of the reasons it being rejected was because of the CLCPA. There was a power plant that tried to repower, again, using natural gas, and I forget which town this was, and was rejected because of the CLCPA. So when government has a clear mandate, and it also helps that the Cuomo administration embraced the CLCPA at the level that they did when it finally passed. But you can see the impacts right away, right? And it just boggles the mind if we were to get an amendment passed in the Constitution, the potential for that to have not just action but quick action, quick measurable action. I would have said before this year is unrealistic. But even in the middle of COVID, we saw state government taking it seriously. So I'm cynically optimistic about the Green Amendment.
All right, thanks, Eddie, for attending, and thanks for sharing your thoughts as always. Kate, can we hear any final thoughts that you have?
Yeah, I guess what I'd like to say to everyone attending is, we're environmental advocates, along with our partners, with Maya, For the Generations, Adirondack Mountain Club. We're on a campaign to help pass this in New York. So get in touch with any of our organizations if you want to learn more about that campaign or be part of that campaign. Another important aspect of what we're going to be doing over the next couple months in terms of momentum building is working with different levels of municipal governments to pass resolutions in support of this. We think that's a really powerful statement when the counties across New York, the municipalities across New York can signal to the state government that this is important to them, which is important to their constituents and their people. So if you are an elected official or want to get involved in this resolution process, please reach out to myself or Joshua or any of our partners, and look forward to having this on a ballot next year.
Thanks, Kate, and we'll make sure to pass some information out in the thank you email about how to reach out to Green Advocates New York. Environmental Advocates New York. Sorry about that. And lastly, Maya, do you have any parting thoughts you'd like to share with us?
So first off, thank you for this wonderful forum and this wonderful engagement. And Eddie, I'll take your cynical optimism. I think that's great. If we can turn you, I feel like we are really on a good path. But I do just, our current system of laws are failing us. We can see that, but we can also all imagine, and we can see in the 2 other states that have a Green Amendment, how this is a powerful, powerful tool. It's a shield, right, to protect our communities against bad things, but it's also a sword to advance good things, whether it's forcing the states to clean up a long ignored toxic site or pass good legislation that will protect present and future generations and truly address environmental justice issues and end environmental racism. It is a powerful tool that good government officials can use to do good things, but when bad government officials get into office, it's a tool that we, the people, can use to defend ourselves against them and to hold them accountable. And whatever your priority on the environmental front, right, this is a positive tool that can help you. And I just want to offer lastly, right, we all spend so much time in the environmental advocacy having to fight against the bad and the bad and the bad, right, that they keep foisting on us. This is an opportunity to fight for something positive and powerful, the right to clean water and clean air and a healthful environment. And in passing that positive, powerful protection, we will be able to better fend off all the bad attacks that are coming crashing down upon us all the time. But hopefully, right, we'll be able to lift it all up and empower all of us moving forward. So thank you. Thank you. And I hope you all join the New York Green Amendment movement. And anybody who wants to talk about the name later, we can have another conversation about that. It's a really powerful name that is actually resonating and has synergistic effects across states. I saw some chatter on that in the chat box, so just quickly addressing that. And we got Green Amendment. The Green Amendment was there before the Green New Deal, just FYI.
All right, well, thanks everyone. Thanks to all of our panelists. Thanks for everyone that took time to listen to us. Again, we'll be sharing this on our YouTube channel and also on our website, which is tishmancenter.org. I also appreciate Eddie's shout out about the New Jersey cumulative impacts bill, which was actually worked on by one of our associate directors at the Tishman Center, Bautista. So we'll be sharing information with you later. And again, hopefully you all are keeping safe and have a good night. Thank you.